In the darkness of the concert hall, without an amplifier, Jimi Hendrix touched the strings of his guitar and 3,000 people fell into a silence they had never known before. The power went out at 9:47 p.m. One moment, the Fillmore East was alive with sound, Hendrix's Stratocaster screaming through Marshall stacks, drums thundering, bass rumbling through the floorboards. 3,000 people on their feet, bodies moving, voices raised in that collective roar that only live music can create. The next moment, nothing. Complete electrical failure. The amplifiers died mid-note. The stage lights cut to black. Even the emergency exit signs seemed to dim, as if the building itself had taken a breath and held it. The crowd's reaction was immediate and instinctive. Confusion first. Then frustration. Voices rising in protest. Someone near the back shouted for their money back. Others began clapping rhythmically, demanding the show continue. The energy in the room was turning. That dangerous shift that happens when a crowd goes from celebration to complaint. Backstage, the venue manager was already moving, flashlight in hand, heading toward the circuit breakers. The band's road manager was shouting into a walkie-talkie. Mitch Mitchell, Hendrix's drummer, had stood up from his kit, looking around in the darkness. Noel Redding set his bass down carefully, waiting. And Jimi Hendrix sat down. Not walked off stage. Not joined the chaos. Not waited for someone to fix the problem. He simply sat down on a wooden stool someone had left near the drum riser, pulled his Stratocaster across his lap, and let the cable fall loose from the guitar jack. Unplugged. Acoustic. Just wood and strings and air. The crowd didn't notice at first. They were too busy being loud, being frustrated, being what crowds become when the show stops unexpectedly. But a few people near the front saw him sitting there in the faint glow of emergency lighting. They stopped shouting. They watched. Hendrix placed his left hand on the fretboard. His fingers found a chord, not a complex one, not a technical display. Just a simple open chord that any guitarist learns in their first week. And he strummed it once. The sound was quiet. Impossibly quiet compared to the wall of amplified thunder that had filled the room moments before. Just the pure acoustic ring of 6 strings, the natural resonance of the guitar's wooden body, barely loud enough to reach the first few rows. But something happened. The people who heard it stopped moving. Stopped talking. Stopped everything. Hendrix didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. The silence spread like a wave moving through water. The people who had heard the chord touched the shoulders of those beside them. A finger to lips. A gentle gesture for quiet. And those people turned and did the same to others. Within 30 seconds, 3,000 people had gone completely silent. No one was shouting for refunds anymore. No one was clapping rhythmically. No one was moving toward the exits. 3,000 people were holding their breath, straining to hear the quiet sound of one man playing an unplugged electric guitar in the darkness. Hendrix played another chord. Different voicing, same gentleness. Then another. Not a song anyone recognized. Not a song at all, really. Just chords, one after another, with long spaces of silence between them. Each one pure and simple and completely unhurried. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what had happened earlier that day. Jimi Hendrix had been tired. Not the normal tiredness of touring. He'd been doing that for years and had learned to function on minimal sleep and maximum adrenaline. This was different. Deeper. The kind of exhaustion that comes from playing a role that doesn't quite fit anymore. He'd spent the afternoon in a hotel room with his guitar, not practicing, just playing. Quiet playing. The kind of playing you do when no one is listening, when there's no performance required, when you're just trying to remember why you picked up the instrument in the first place. His friend Devin Wilson had stopped by. Found him sitting on the floor by the window, guitar across his lap, playing so softly she almost didn't hear it from the hallway. "You okay, Jimmy?" He looked up, smiled that gentle smile that never quite matched his wild man stage persona. "Just tired of being loud, you know? Everything's always so loud." Concerts in 4 hours. You're literally famous for being loud. Yeah. He'd played another quiet chord. I know. Devon had sat down beside him. What if you weren't? What if I wasn't what? Loud. What if you just played quiet sometime? Think they'd still listen? Hendrix had considered this. Probably not. People come for the fire. The noise. The show. Maybe. Or maybe they come because you're you. And maybe you'd be surprised what happens if you give them something different. He'd played another chord. Let it ring in the quiet hotel room. Maybe. Now, 6 hours later, sitting on a stool in a powerless concert hall, Jimi Hendrix was finding out. The chord progressions were simple. Almost meditative. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. Wasn't trying to prove anything. He was just playing, the way he'd played in that hotel room, the way he played when no one was watching, the way he played before he became Jimi Hendrix the legend and was just James Marshall Hendrix who loved the guitar. In the 5th row, a young musician named Michael sat frozen. He'd come to the concert hoping to learn Hendrix's secrets. His techniques, his tricks, the ways he made the guitar sound like it was speaking in tongues. He'd brought a notebook. He'd planned to study every move. Now, listening to these simple chords played on an acoustic guitar in the darkness, Michael felt something shift inside him. This wasn't about technique. This wasn't about speed or volume, or innovation. This was about the space between the notes. The silence that made each sound meaningful. The confidence to play one chord and let it breathe instead of rushing to fill every second with more. In the 20th row, a woman named Sarah who had never particularly cared about guitar music found herself crying. She didn't know why. The chords were simple. There were no lyrics. But something about the intimacy of it, the way this famous musician was playing for 3,000 people as if he were alone in his room, broke something open in her chest. Subscribe and leave a comment. Because the meaning of this moment is still unfolding. Backstage, the venue manager had found the problem. A blown transformer. He could have it fixed in maybe 15 minutes. He started back toward the stage to tell the band, to apologize to Hendrix, to explain the delay. The road manager stopped him with a hand on his arm. Put a finger to his lips. Pointed toward the stage. The manager looked. Saw Hendrix sitting in the dim emergency lighting, playing an unplugged guitar. Saw 3,000 people standing in perfect silence, listening. Let him finish, the road manager whispered. The manager nodded and stepped back into the shadows. On stage, Mitch Mitchell had sat back down at his drums. Not to play, the drums wouldn't make sense here. Just to watch. To witness. To be present for whatever this was. Noel Redding stood with his bass hanging from its strap, motionless, barely breathing. Hendrix played on. The chords were starting to form a pattern now. Not a song, exactly. More like a conversation with himself. Question and answer. Tension and release. Reaching and returning. His eyes were closed. His face was serene. In the faint light, you could see his fingers moving on the fretboard, not the lightning-fast runs he was famous for, but slow, deliberate movements. Each finger placement intentional. Each chord given all the time it needed. In that quiet moment, Hendrix did something no one expected. He began to hum. Very quietly. Almost under his breath. Not a melody anyone knew. Just a low, gentle humming that wove between the chords, filling the spaces, creating something that was half music, half meditation. The sound carried in the silence. Not far. Maybe to the first 15 rows. But those who heard it felt something fundamental shift. This wasn't a rock concert anymore. This wasn't a performance. This was a man sharing something private, something true, and somehow making it feel like a gift. A young boy in the 8th row, maybe 12 years old, there with his older brother, would remember this moment for the rest of his life. 50 years later, he would tell his own children. I saw Jimi Hendrix play once. He didn't use an amp. He didn't need one. He played one chord and taught me that power isn't about volume. In the balcony, an older jazz musician named Coleman had come reluctantly, dragged by friends who wanted to see what the young rock kids were doing to music. He'd expected noise, chaos, the death of everything he'd loved about music. Instead, he was hearing something he recognized. The space. The silence. The understanding that what you don't play matters as much as what you do. This kid, this rock and roll kid with the wild hair and the pyrotechnic reputation, understood something that took most musicians decades to learn. Coleman would tell people later. He played like Miles. Not the sound, the philosophy. The knowing when to stop. Hendrix played another chord. Let it ring. Let it fade almost completely before playing the next. The humming stopped. Just the guitar now. Just the wood and strings and the natural resonance of the instrument, amplified only by the silence of 3,000 people listening with complete attention. What followed stayed with everyone in the room, long after the last note faded. The lights came back on suddenly. The transformer fixed. The electrical system restored. The amplifiers hummed back to life. The stage lights blazed. The crowd didn't cheer. Didn't applaud. They just stood there, blinking in the sudden brightness, still holding the silence like something precious that might break. Hendrix opened his eyes. Looked out at them. 3,000 faces looking back. Waiting. He stood slowly. Plugged his guitar back into the cable. The connection made a small pop through the amp. He turned to Mitch, to Noel. Nodded. And then he played. But it was different now. Still loud. The amplifiers were back, the power was on, the show was technically continuing. But there was space in it now. Silence between the notes. Moments where he'd play a phrase and then stop, let it breathe, give it room. The crowd heard the difference. They'd heard Hendrix before. They'd heard the fire and fury. But now they were hearing something else. The restraint. The choice. The understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. The show went on for another hour. Every song had moments of that same quality, space, breath, intentional silence. And every time Hendrix created one of those moments, the crowd fell quiet, listening with the same reverence they'd given those acoustic chords in the darkness. After the show, in the dressing room, Devin Wilson found Hendrix sitting alone with his guitar across his lap. "How'd you know?" she asked. "Know what?" "That they'd listen. That they'd stay quiet. That they'd..." She gestured, searching for words. "That it would work." Hendrix shrugged, played a quiet chord. "I didn't. But I figured, maybe it's time to stop being so afraid of the silence." "What were you afraid of?" "That if I stopped being loud, they'd forget I was there." He played another chord. "But tonight I learned something." "What?" "If you give people silence, and you fill it with something true, they'll listen harder than if you scream." Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. The venue manager had the blown transformer preserved. He mounted it on a plaque and hung it in his office with a small inscription. "The night Jimi Hendrix taught 3,000 people how to listen." The wooden stool Hendrix sat on was eventually donated to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The placard beside it reads, "Sometimes the most powerful sound is the one that makes you stop and listen." Years later, musicians who were in that crowd would tell the same story. The power went out. Hendrix sat down. Played one chord. And everything changed. Not because of what he played. Because of what he didn't. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. Michael, the young guitarist from the fifth row, stopped trying to play fast. He learned to play quiet. To leave space. He became a session musician known for knowing when not to play. Sarah, who cried in the 20th row, started going to concerts differently. Listening differently. She understood that music isn't always about the sound. Sometimes it's about the silence that makes the sound matter. And Jimi Hendrix never forgot that night. The night he learned that power doesn't come from volume. It comes from knowing when to stop. The blown transformer still hangs in the venue manager's old office, now a museum piece. The inscription underneath was later amended. The night silence became the loudest sound in the room.